Hey everyone, Coops here from the Whole Box and Dice. Amonkhet, can we flip it? Only a few more of them to go. Remember, at the end of the last video, we'll be announcing the Mythic and Invocation giveaway, plus the Deck Builders Toolkit and the Planeswalker kits. Therefore, Australia only, the last two there. But the Invocation and the Mythic, that can be anywhere worldwide. Pop that into a nice top loader for you, so get commenting on those respective videos. That's the Can We Flip It Day 2 and the first bundle, the first Amonkhet bundle, so check out the video playlist for them. Got something a little bit different for you today. This one is a deck tech, and it is a very, very funky one. I've been working on this deck for maybe 3 odd months now, maybe a little bit longer actually, and it's gone through so many different builds. It's been Teamer at one stage, it's been really heavy on land destruction, really light on land destruction, control at various levels, a whole bunch of creatures rotating through to try and find the perfect suite. But as Amonkhet was spoiled, and as they released more cards for Amonkhet, there definitely was some key cards that I thought would really fit in the deck. That's why I kind of held off doing this video, and then obviously needed to test it once the new cards came in. I took it to a PPTQ, and I've had it at F&M, and I'm really happy with where the deck is now. I tried one last variant at the PPTQ yesterday here in Sydney. Just wanted to see if there was a better way, but I've finally decided this is the best way to run this deck. And here is blue-red land destruction for you all. We're running land destruction, so let's probably start off with those spells. How do we kill our opponent's land? Actually, just before I start this, you have to be a certain type of player to play this deck. I've had some very horrific reactions to killing lands. There has been some very aggressive scoops when on turn 5 they have no lands left. So just bear in mind, it's you know, if you've seen some people have some fun playing control, this is control at a whole another level, because at least you're casting spells and they're getting bounced or getting exiled or rejected in a control deck. This often you don't have the mana to cast anything, and watching your opponent discard things like Glorybringer or Planeswalkers or just expensive bombs that would normally wreck you, that leaves a pretty sour taste in their mouth. But the land destruction suite looks like this. We start off with 3 copies of Violent Impact and 3 copies of Structural Distortion. Now, Structural Distortion is the 4 mana, exile target artifact or land, deals 2 as well to that controller, and Impact is the same, sorcery speed for 4, destroys target artifact or land, but it has cycling on it too. Really like that you can cycle this. It's great because you will get to a point where you either don't need to destroy any more lands, or you've got 3 or 4 in hand and you don't need another one. You can definitely cycle it during your opponent's end step, which is great. Get that card draw going. But it does hit artifacts as well. The 2 damage over the top is nice. It seems like that's the best you'll ever get on a land destruction spell. You know, I think gone are the days where you'll ever get 3 mana land destruction. But we do have a couple of ways of cheating these out or being able to combo off each land destruction spell. Next up in the land destruction suite, we have 3 copies of Crumble to Dust and a playset of Volcanic Upheaval. Upheaval is destroy target land at instant speed for 4, where Crumble to Dust is exile target non-basic land, searches controller's graveyard, hand, and library for any number of cards with the same name as that land, and exile them, then that player shuffles his or her library. So instant speed is great because we are running some counters in the deck, so you do get that decision. You know, see what your opponent's playing on the turn. If you want to use a counter spell, counter it. If they don't play anything, which often you lock them out of being able to play stuff, you can then hit a land destruction in their end step at instant speed, which is horrible. Crumble to Dust, though, is just an absolute MVP, and there's only a little bit of danger. I saw at the last event there was a mono black aggro deck that went top 8, but a lot of the decks, especially when Saheeli was around, I was playing this, you even had 4-color decks that just run so many non-basic lands. There's plenty of ways that you can hit this. Please don't ever try and cast the instant speed on a Evolving Wilds, because in response they will just sack it. So please don't ever waste one of them that way. But Crumble to Dust, the fact that you get to look at your opponent's hand means you set yourself up, because you know if they've got no lands in hand, you can then choose to play creatures or hold on to things or not hold on to things and play things, which is super, super valuable. You also take potentially 3 lands out of their deck, and you get to make the joke like, hey, I'm just helping you out, I'm just thinning your deck. But they don't often laugh at that joke, but I find it quite amusing. It's great in that way. You know, take something off the battlefield, it's exiled, you know, especially if Green Black Delirium does hang around, that is very nice as well. And then obviously just that knowledge of seeing what you're in your opponent's hand cannot be understated. So that is just a huge advantage and really maps, I guess, your turns out for the rest of the game. So that's what the land destruction suite looks like, and if you do verse a mono deck, we do run a couple of copies of just things like Demolish, and we fill out the playsets of the first 2 land destruction spells, just in case you want to take all copies of Crumble to Dust out. But normally there is something like an Aether Hub, or a Westvale, or something to that effect, Blighted Fen or a Blighted Cataract or something. There's normally a, non-basic land, even in a monocolored deck, so it doesn't hurt just to keep one in there. You can always throw it away on cards like Baral's discard trigger anyway. Into the sorceries here, and we're running 2 copies of Baral's Expertise. Return up to 3 target artifacts and or creatures to their owner's hands, and you may cast a card with converted mana cost 4 or less from your hand without paying its mana cost. No points for working out why we're playing this one here. Amazingly great if you can kill a land the turn before, and then they play another creature, or maybe they can't play a creature, and you pick up anything that's still on the board. You can bring this online on turn 4 if you have a Baral or a Homunculus out, and the fact that you then free cast something like a land destruction spell, locking them out of the thing that you just picked up potentially, is just absolutely devastating. It's great that you can pick up vehicles as well, so you can pick up things like Heart of Kiran, Aetherworks Marvel, all those pesky little artifacts. Super valuable, and you can sometimes even pick up your own creatures. There might be times where later on in the game you've got some of our bigger drops out and you want to pick it up just so you can rehash that enter the battlefield trigger. It doesn't happen too often. You normally want to use it early, but I think 2 is the right amount of slots for something like Baral's Expertise, but I could definitely see, depending on how you wanted to build the sideboard, a couple more slots in there for it. Moving into the instance that we're running, and we're running 2 copies of Kozilek's Return and 1 copy of Reduced to Rubble. Reduced to Rubble, counter target spell unless its controller pays 3, and the Aftermath ability is up to 3 target lands don't untap during their controller's next untap step. Kozilek's Return is the instant for 3, deals 2 damage to each creature, and when you cast an Eldrazi creature spell with CMC 7 or greater, you may exile Kozilek's Return from your graveyard. If you do, deals 5 damage to each creature there. Now, Reduced to Rubble is really handy because an on-curve counterspell. We're just running 1 copy, but it is nice to see because we are running some other counters. But just being able to have a second use for that, the Aftermath trigger is always good. You will have games as well where you can send this to the graveyard just on Baral's, draw discard trigger, just because you do still get that value from Aftermath, which is nice. It's great if you can bounce a couple of lands back or even counter some initial creature spells and then use this ability to then just lock them out for 1 more turn just to set you up. Maybe you need to get to that 5 or 6 mana, or you want to play a tapped land and you don't want to risk losing out any tempo. So I do like just having the 1 copy. Kozilek's Return is great. You've heard me talk about Baral. We are running Baral in the deck, which Baral survives this, although you will watch out for people shocking or then Harness Lightning to do the last bit of damage to Baral. But Kozilek's Return takes out so many annoying things in the format. Takes out Scrounger, takes out Thalia, for example, Tyler's Tracker, if they don't have the mana to then put a counter on it. So there's plenty of great targets that it hits, and we do have a way to get that 5 damage value offered as well, which is always nice. Next up in the instant slot, and this is where the control side of the deck kicks in, we're running 3 copies of Essence Scatter and 3 copies of Censor. Now, these are some of the cards I was talking about wanting to wait till Amonkhet to bring into the deck. Essence Scatter is just an amazing 2 mana a counter target creature spell, and with the Baral out, it goes down to just a single blue, where Censor is a great on-curve stopper, and that cycling ability at instant speed at any time is amazing for card draw. 3 copies of each. This is where you need to be, I guess, you need to be smart with your counter spells and your land destruction in this deck. And it's interesting, not that there's a lot of decks that you can really just start drawing cards and just kind of work out on the fly. The more you play this deck, the better you'll get at it. You'll start to learn, especially depending on the deck you're playing, is it better to go hard early for land destruction and try and take out, stop them getting to their big stuff, or, if they don't have any creatures out early, for example, or is it better countering, with things like Censor, with Essence Scatter, their early game, and then they're locked out of that, and then you can go to land destruction? It is a tricky one, especially if you have an instant speed land destruction in hand. Makes it a lot easier because you can hold on to an Essence Scatter or a Censor, but just you do have to think about that. You do have to think about, this is the deck I'm playing, what are they likely to have kept in their hand, especially game 2. You've got a good look at the deck. Worst case scenario, they've put 15 brand new cards in. Highly unlikely, but you never know. And so you just have to be smart with your counter spells, and you do want to see some in your opening hand for sure. Moving to the creatures here, and we're going to be running Baral as well as the Curious Homunculus, or the Homuncadunk, as I like to call him. This one is 3 copies of Baral, Chief of Compliance, and 3 copies of the Homuncadunk. Baral is amazing because it makes your instants and sorceries cost 1 less, which brings both his expertise as well as our LD on turn 1 earlier, and Homunculus has the tap ability to add a colorless mana, but once you get 3 instants or sorceries in the graveyard in your upkeep, you're able to flip him into a 3/4 with Prowess, which also shares the same trigger as Baral, making your instants and sorceries 1 cheaper, which just means you can have insane value plays, because your spells are costing 2 less. Baral is amazing with the counter spells because if you do have too many lands in hand, or even too many land destruction spells in hand, you can counter it if you are searching for that land, or you're searching for a bomb, or whatever you're looking for to counter it. And you do get that value when, once you don't have Summoning Sickness on the Homunculus, you can then tap it to bring, the spell cost down by 1, plus Baral's trigger, and you can play some nasty stuff unexpectedly with only a little bit of mana up as well, which is always nice. Next couple of creatures that we're running in the deck, we're running a 3 of Enigma Drake. Now this is a card that absolutely catches people off guard. It's the Flying Drake for 3, 1 generic, a blue and a red. Its power is equal to the number of instant and sorcery cards in your graveyard. Now, you store the cards with Cycle. We've got Censor, we've got Violent Upheaval. You saw the counters that we're running. They're obviously going to hit the graveyard too. You saw all the land destruction and potentially the double turns with Baral's expertise and a free cast land destruction. You can make a 7, 8, 10, 12 powered Enigma Drake very, very easily, and that will just straight up win you the game. There's not a lot of cheap early flyers besides Heart of Kiran that you're going to come up against. Some decks play Stormchaser Mage if you are versing that kind of red-blue shotgun, just flood the board with burn and flying prowess damage, but you can often take them out not too differently, and you've got the 4 toughness as well, which does give you a nice body to do some blocking with, but this is the real value is, unless you're very confident you can stop any kind of combat tricks, you often just let the damage through, because if you're hitting for them for 10, 12 in the air, that's a 2-turn clock, and that makes it very, very difficult for our opponents. We want to get instants and sorceries in the graveyard for the Homuncadunk anyway, so let's get him in there to help the Enigma Drake as well, because this will just straight up win matches. And if they don't print something to replace Grasp of Darkness, which I don't think they will, it makes it very difficult for our opponents to take this out. They have to revolt something like a Fatal Push, and if you're not really engaging with them in, you're not going to really swing in with someone like Baral or Homunculus, for example, you don't often get that trigger. They often don't have a lot of ways, given that you're killing the lands. They don't have a lot of things that they can sack, and this often goes unchecked and just straight up wins you the game over a couple of turns. Last couple creatures that we're running in the deck, we are running 2 of the Torrential Gearhulk and 1 copy of the Elder Deep-Fiend. The Gearhulk requires absolutely no explanation. You should all know this card by now. It is a bomb for 6 with flash, and you can recast something. You can recast a counterspell. You can recast Censor. Or, amazingly, you can recast your land destruction spell at instant speed, the one that we have in there, which is just so disheartening for our opponent. During their end step, flash on a Gearhulk, recast that spell, taking out another one of the lands, and leaving a big 5/6 body. And the very last creature in the deck, the Elder Deep-Fiend for 8. It's the Eldrazi Octopus with Flash and Emerge. It's a 5/6. When you cast it, you get to tap up to 4 target permanents. Great for tapping down the board, but you also get to activate Kozilek's Return, which then often wipes everything. And if you do have the Gearhulk out, it's a 5/6, so it survives it as well. You definitely don't have to play Kozilek's Return, and you definitely don't have to play the Elder Deep-Fiend. You could just run 3 Gearhulks, and you could put 2 copies of something like Harness Lightning, or even increase the reduced to Rubble count in the deck if you wanted, maybe even some Glimmer or some Anticipates for card draw. But I just really like the early game Kozilek's Return, take out some of the stuff that you might not have been able to pick up because you started off with a bit more land destruction, and then just being able to wipe the board and wipe some really big stuff off the board as well. Things like, flashing on an Elder Deep-Fiend to save your Torrential Gearhulk, so they might target it with removal. You'll often have, 2 blue spare, and you flash it on, emerge it out of, do the 5 damage to the board, take out things like Glorybringer, which is awesome as well. Land base for the deck, nothing too fancy in this one. We run 3 copies of Spirebluff Canal and the Wandering Fumarole, and then it's pretty much just basics with the exception of 1 copy of Blighted Cataract, which is pay 5 and a blue, so pay 6, tap it to sack it and draw 2 cards. That's really just in there because you do have some dead turns if your opponent hasn't scooped just yet, and it is nice to put 2 more cards into your hand. It's, once again, not a necessity, but I do like there's not a lot of card draw in the deck unless you're looking to cycle some of the spells or use Baral's triggers, so it is nice just to have something at the end of a dead turn to be able to sack it and put a few more cards in hand. Now, what does the sideboard look like for this deck? And this is something that I've spent a very, very long time going back and forth trying to work out what cards need to be in there for certain matchups. You know, what are we weak against? What do we need more spells against? What do we need less of? And I actually stumbled across this. I saw, which hopefully you guys have all checked out his channel, Dev from SBMTG. He's done a very similar blue-red land destruction deck, uses the same kind of premise, uses cards like Baral and Homunculus. This is pre-Amonkhet, right? And he had a very clever strategy where you can actually change the deck, and he used the term like a transitional sideboard, and you can actually side in effectively a Dynavolt tower build while taking out a lot of land destruction. And I've tried a couple of things. You can definitely play things like Harness Lightning and Shocks. You probably don't need to run as many Shocks now with no Saheeli. But Magma Spray, for example, for taking out pesky things like, you know, Thalia and Scrap Heap Scrounger and Tracker, those kind of cards. But I do really like, especially if you win game 1 and you lose game 2, you make minimal changes to the board game 2 if you're pretty happy with how the deck works and you think you can still take them. On game 3, if you can pretty much change the whole, you know, your whole deck almost, you know, take out all the LD, or even just leaving just a tiny little bit, you know, keeping maybe a Crumble to Dust if you just want to be able to disrupt those dual lands if they're playing a lot of them, or, you know, maybe you want to keep in the cycling Violent Upheavals just because they can hit artifacts and they do cycle as well, but you can pretty much change the deck into blue-red spells Dynavolt Tower. And this is kind of what the board would look like, and it's very similar to what he put up, and I do really like this for the deck, so massive hats off to Dev over at Strictly Better MTG, and definitely check out his channel if you have not already done so. So you run 4 copies of Dynavolt Tower because it becomes a DVT deck, so that's pretty standard. You run copies of some Ceremonious Rejection, specifically for the Vehicles deck. Also want to run copies of Release the Gremlins as well. Some Glimmers in there for card draw, some Magma Sprays, as well as some Incendiary Flows, and a Negate. And also put in, increase the copies of your Rejection, your Censor, as well as your Essence Scatter there. So the deck really can change quite aggressively as you look at the sideboard from an LD deck to a blue-red spells deck, and you still get that benefit with things like Baral, which makes your creatures cheaper, Homunculus, which is great, you can still get the Prowess trigger, the Enigma Drake still become huge, you still get value with Torrential Gearhulk, Kozilek's Return, as well as Elder Deep-Fiend, but it really can throw your opponent off guard. And I really like that. You know, like I said, I tried so many different decks. You know, when this was Teamer, it looked very different because you had green in there. So I played the ramp pieces, and I played Attune, and I played Worldbreaker, which was a great complement to Torrential Gearhulk. But then I couldn't really fit in Elder Deep-Fiend into that build, which I didn't like as much because I really did like Worldbreaker. But as Amonkhet came out, I saw there was value with Censor, with Essence and Scatter, with Violent Upheaval that had the cycle. I wanted to go back to blue-red, and I definitely think Dev Sideboard for this makes a lot of sense. And I put a few tweaks in there just with some of the Amonkhet cards, but the sideboard is very dependent on what you think you're going to, you know, come up against most. Yesterday at the PPTQ, I saw a lot of Mardu, a lot of red-green God aggro. You know, it's pretty much plays things like Glorybringer and Ronus, Arlen, Chandra. It was a very interesting deck. I, you know, handled it pretty well, given that a lot of them are big drops and require double red or double green, and you can take out that source, which really stalls them out quite aggressively. But you do need a sideboard, and, you know, being able to side in DVT on game 3 just makes for a nut. It's so difficult to, you would never expect it, especially, you know, with minimal changes. Game 2, you're like, all right, finally game 3, I think I've got a way to get around LD, and then suddenly it's Dynavolt Tower, spells are still cheaper, you still finish with the Torrential Gearhulk bombs and have huge Enigma Drakes, and it just becomes a completely different deck. Well, that's about it for me today, guys. Hopefully you enjoyed the video. Hit the thumbs up if you did. Leave me a comment if you played a deck like this or you've played against a deck like this. I promise you it is a lot of fun. As long as your people that you play against are not going to like punch you out playing LD, because you get some horrific reactions when you start killing opponents' lands. Like I said, the next couple of 7 days of Amonkhet Can We Flip It will be up shortly. Get involved in the competition if you haven't already done so. Have some awesome prizes to give away in the coming months as well. So thank you so much to everyone who's interacting with me on the channel. The right people are taking notice, and it's just been awesome. Like I said, subscribe if you want to see more of the content. Hit the thumbs up if you've enjoyed this one, and don't hate me too much for posting an LD deck. But thanks again for watching. I've been Coops. This is the Whole Box and Dice. Peace, guys.